Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoye, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Melissa Doman, an organizational psychologist, former clinical mental health therapist, and author who specializes in mental health at work. Melissa has presented and consulted for international, national, and local organizations and Fortune 500 companies across industries and globally, including clients like Estée Lauder, Salesforce, Siemens, Janssen, Charlotte Tilbury, Bumble and Bumble, Legal and General, and many more. Melissa holds an MA in Counseling Psychology from Adler University and a BA in Sociology with a minor in Communications from the George Washington University. Today, we will be discussing her new book, Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work. Here's why, and how to do it really well. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Well, Melissa, you must have been busy on a press junket for your book. And you must be like talking this up. I've had a chance to kind of look through it. It looks awesome. It looks like you're hitting all the right points that most people who sit in a clinical practice would go, you know, this could be something I could hand to my patients and when they have issues at work and, you know, when they're big issues or even little issues. So tell us what you've been up to.
Thank you so much. And I definitely have been very busy, and I'm deeply appreciative to be this busy because it means people want to talk about it and they think it will be useful. That's the ultimate goal, is I want people to find it to be easy to read and easy to apply. Mm-hmm. And what you just said is that would be the dream. If clinicians were handing this to their patients saying, if you're having trouble talking about it at work, here's the how-to guide. And back when I was in clinical practice, the majority of my patients said, there's no way I could talk about this stuff at work. They would ask me. That was always the theme. And so what I've really been up to is making sure that every industry knows this book exists, making sure people know it's aimed at the individual, no matter where you sit in the organization, and that it has everything in there that you can use literally immediately. You just have to do the work. And there's a lot of exercises in there, very concrete, easy to apply. And I'm very appreciative that it's also been highly embraced by the HR community, because HR folks, oh my gosh, the under recognition of the vicarious trauma that they go through working in HR is not that far off from clinical. Let me tell you.
Well, tell us about that. Like, what is, like, how are HR people traumatized? I could assume they are, but like, what specifically are they going through?
It's a long list. So there are lots of HR folks that do deal with emergency situations, just like clinicians do, whether it is an employee who's potentially of harm to themselves, occasionally harm to others, if they're involved in illegal activity or really sticky situations. It's also traumatizing for them when they have to fire people or end someone's employment or impact their financial livelihood. You know, those things sit with you. And there's also a lot of impromptu counseling and coaching that HR professionals do. And there can be a lot of compassion fatigue from that. And there are so many HR folks I've spoken to that have gotten into really high pressure situations where they're expected to not show a shred of personal impact. How is that sustainable? And it's just not recognized as a profession where you can have vicarious trauma, but it should be and is starting to be. There's a lot of very similar correlations between HR and clinical, as I've come to discover in my discussions with HR folks in the past 2 years. And with the pandemic, a lot of them are quitting, can't take it anymore.
A lot of HR departments are thinning out because of the pandemic.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. They can't take it anymore.
Well, I would imagine it's also a bit like being a mediator in the sense that you have to be very objective when there are disputes at work. Right.
Yes, and it's like they have to put their humanity aside, and they sometimes have to make decisions that are not only hard, but they may not agree with. And there are a lot of spots in the book where I speak directly to folks that work in HR, not only to show them how to incorporate these sorts of conversations into their work, but also the importance of sharing their own mental health stories as a way of humanizing themselves as people in addition to folks who work in HR. So it's a really stuck between a rock and a hard place position within an organization. And that sort of historical positioning needs to be changed. Yeah. It's really not fair to those folks.
Yeah. Well, I wonder what the impact, because so many people work for large companies or global companies. We can maybe refer to them as monolithic companies. It's a bit like if you've ever seen the movie Brazil, where, people are fighting over desk space and,
No.
Oh, you haven't seen Brazil, the Terry Gilliam movie?
No.
You should watch it. It's
I will.
You'll laugh. It's sad, but at the same time you'll laugh. Anyway, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as Brazil. People aren't being tortured, at least intentionally tortured. But okay, so you have these monolithic companies and you're just a little person walking around trying to keep your head low a lot, right? And I assume that people at work don't want to talk about mental health issues, precisely because they're afraid what people might think of them. They're afraid it might impact their employment.
Oh yeah. And it's the very common theme amongst people I've spoken to, not only in the live sessions I do for companies, but also in the interviews that I did for the book. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be seen differently. I don't want to be seen as incapable. I don't want people to look at me the wrong way. I don't want them to make me feel like I'm being ostracized. I don't want to be seen as weak or incapable or as a bad leader. These are all the assumptions that people carry with them, not only from what they might witness in terms of the unwritten rules within an organization, but also some of the social messaging that they were conditioned with outside of the workplace. They all inform these opinions that we hold and the fears that we hold around the social stigma. They are influenced by inside and outside of work factors, all of which I went into great detail in the book. And it makes people, what they've said so far, it makes them pause and say, I didn't even realize that was happening. That's the thing, is the book is not only about here's how to have this discussion. It's also, how do we get to where we are now? How do we get over the obstacles that still exist? How do we address how the mental health at work movement in some ways is starting to go off the rails? And it's really looking at all of it, even the hard parts, because I don't think you're setting people up for success and equipping them to understand how and why to have these conversations unless you talk about the hard parts too, like how it can go wrong.
That's an interesting statement. The mental health movement is going off the rails. Like, in what sense are you saying? Like, do you think people in society in general or at work?
All of the above. Here's what I mean. So there are some trends that have developed as an offshoot of the mental health at work movement that not only encourage toxic positivity unintentionally, like creating a positive mental health at work culture, a positive this, coming as the best version of yourself. Talk about a way to make people feel like their negative thoughts and feelings are not welcome, and neither is your non-can-do attitude. And I'm serious. And then the way that they dance around the words mental health. So they'll say mental wellness or, insert some other sort of synonym because they're still dancing around the topic. And then on top of that, we have the hack your way to mental fitness programs that have come out of those, which just make my blood boil because you're already marginalizing people who look at that program and go, I don't think that's for me and I don't think I can do it. So then it makes them feel even worse. And when your organization brings in those sorts of programs, it unintentionally sets the tone of this is how it's going to be.
Mm. Well, are some of those like offshoots of or blatant use of mindfulness programs to make you smarter, better, faster at work, and
yes,
like which has kind of been stripped out of Buddhism and doesn't have any philosophical, right? Ground.
And also, being 100% mindful all the time is just nonsense. It is not possible, especially in this world. And some of those programs are like, find ways to be mindful all the time, or choose happiness, la la la. That's not the human condition. That's not the world we live in. So when I see these programs, I wrote about it in the book, and I say, I get that most of these people, they're trying to do something helpful. Some of them are not. And some of them want to capitalize on the vulnerability of others. And that's not the way it should go. And then on top of that, because the mental health at work movement is gaining so much steam, we unfortunately also have some folks inside the workplace who are crying wolf. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is they're invalidating the stories of others who have very robust mental health experiences that they've been dealing with for a very long time. And they choose to say, because they really messed up on a project, oh, that's the first time they're telling their supervisor that they have PTSD. Oh, is that so? How come I didn't know about this before? The real reason is people are using it to cover up screw-ups because they can, and because it's on its way to becoming a protected characteristic in some ways. So the folks who are crying wolf and invalidating the experiences of others, it's just awful.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's kind of like the plethora of
well, yes, oops. Lola, it's horrible.
I thought that was me coughing. All right, I feel better. I feel better. Yes, Lola, it is horrible, but it's kind of like,
yes, my dog agreed.
What the plethora of ESA, speaking of dogs, ESA letters, emotional support animal letters I get from people who are just trying to scam the system.
Abused.
Yeah. And now not so much, because most people were using it to get onto airlines, and most airlines have stopped that. It also got shut down. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it got shut down.
But there's some cases where I think most states will, like landlords still have to provide an ESA or what are they? Home associations, for condos. Mm-hmm. They have to allow that. So at this point, but that's unfortunate because that hasn't been operationalized very well. It hasn't been structured to what is an ESA. Your dog is an emotional support animal.
No, she's not.
Well, I mean, she supports you emotionally because she's a pet. You can hang out with your dog and she gives you TLC and vice versa, right? Unconditional positive regard. But
when she's not being a brat, yeah.
Right, but she's not like helping you specifically with any mental health issue, right? But that doesn't mean she's not going to support you. It's just a terrible term. I mean, all animals are emotional support animals, but it doesn't mean that they're helping you with your anxiety.
Yeah.
I mean, they do, but they don't. Yeah.
It really frustrates me that people are taking this narrative that took so long to get started and just jumping on the bandwagon because it's easy. It's just like, kids in a playground. A workplace is basically a playground. It's different toys, different, jungle gym, and people still doing the same childlike behaviors to cover their ass.
That's a very, very good way of putting that. That's a very clear way of putting that. You're right.
Thank you.
So people are there's that whole aspect of it, and there's a toxic positivity. Yeah. Also, how much of that is like it's like you do know that people will be companies will be, especially Fortune 500 companies, will be downgraded in their place in the S&P and whatnot if they don't have a support for minorities or LGBTQ rights or things like that. Like that's part of their marketing now. You realize that because like there's this, I forget. Wish I'd done a little bit more research, but there's actually a part of a company that actually works on making sure that the PC-ness of the company is front and forward. So people think that they're doing what they can for democracy and inclusion, while at the same time they might be supporting candidates in certain areas of the country or the world who don't support that at all and might be more dictatorial in their approach to life.
There is a section in the book about how the continued systemic racism has impacted the mental health at work conversation.
Yep.
And I interviewed a couple of folks from the Black community who said how completely frustrating and disingenuous it was that companies will go to their employees in the Black and brown communities and basically say, hey, will you be our poster children?
Really? They just go to them and say, will you be our...
in not so many words.
Are these like famous athletes or just,
No. Workers in the organizations. And basically are like, hey, will you tell your story as part of our initiative, even though I've never asked you for this before? Please.
Yeah. Right.
Talk about disingenuous. That is just unconscionable that you've never shown any interest before, but now that the topic is completely unchained, as it should be, you go to those employees that you've never shown any sort of dedication towards DEI before, and magically now you're like, hey, you want to be all over our online and print ads?
Wow.
Showing how much we're investing in this? That is all kinds of screwed up.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
So you're talking it's almost like you're talking about there's a need for, in these monolithic companies and just in general as a whole, you said a humanism. You caught yourself and you said normalizing, not humanizing. And normalizing is something you've been taught to say in therapy because you normalize, this is like...
Oh, no, I meant to say humanizing.
I know, but I could, your clinical background was...
I know, rearing its
Freudian
head.
slip was showing.
You never lose it, ever. And also, by the way, this is not just the giant monolithic companies. Right. It's companies of all sizes.
Right.
And it's just... there are ways to acknowledge and say, we've been wrong. It's time to talk about this. Let's do it in the right way versus, we have to jump on the bandwagon. Who can we put out at the front of this so we don't look like fools? Right. That's unconscionable. And so I wrote a lot about it in that chapter of the book because the differences between how Black Lives Matter protesters were treated versus the January 6th insurrectionists was nauseating. If you really don't think that that's impacting what they're bringing in around mental health at work conversations, I don't know what universe you're living in. And it's a very indispensable part of this conversation that just needs to be had.
So there's this general, it sounds like there's and correct me if I'm wrong or clarify your feeling of it, but it sounds like there's a dichotomy between what needs to be done versus, and maybe what needs to be done is just an overhaul of the structure of work. So it is more humanized. The structure of work is humanized. And yes, systems can be put in place for that without sounding all socialistic, which, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But so the structure of work needs to be humanized so that people are less like floating individuals in a small or large monolithic organization where they keep their head low and they're more invested in each other and they're more human with each other.
Honestly, the world of work is heavily shifting, and something that I wrote about in earlier parts of the book is around the concept of quote unquote being professional is an outdated concept of a time gone past. And the pressure to compartmentalize is also going away because it's just made up nonsense. Who decided that?
Right.
And so it's really shifting. It doesn't mean you have to lay, 1,000% of the details of your life for the last 30 years on the table. It just means that you shouldn't have to put energy towards hiding things that are normal and prevalent and reasonable and deeply human. Mm-hmm. So the world of work is shifting. And does that mean it's happening in every industry and every company? No, but it is happening in a lot. And so for a lot of the organizations that are realizing, especially the younger generations, just won't work for them if they're not prioritizing those things. Right. And a lot of folks are getting workers who are saying, this company very clearly doesn't care about its people. I'm going to go join the Great Resignation with the rest of them.
Yep. Good. Well, I mean, this is forcing people. I mean, it's good because, I mean, the workers, the proletariat has the upper hand here, which is good. I think that everything has gone so far in the opposite direction where.
Oh yeah, it's an applicant's market right now, not an employer's market. I've never seen anything like this. It's a lot of organizations are having trouble hiring people, believe it or not, and it's because the applicants are advocating for themselves. They want better. They want more.
Yeah.
And so I think it's about taking a good hard look at how you're showing yourself to the marketplace, what those values are, and also showing how you've actually implemented them, not just saying them.
Well, a couple of chapters here you have, which I found kind of interesting concepts in them. The roadblocks to progress outside of work and inside of work. So
yeah,
what's going on with that? What are the differences between what are those roadblocks outside and inside of work, and how do you fix them?
There's a lot. So I'll go over a few of them. So let's say inside of work, for example. One of the most common ones is, for example, leadership stoicism. It is either overtly or subtly encouraged. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those messages that people get inside of organizations, especially if you're a leader, is basically keep it together or we're going to have a problem. So there's that. There's also when people unintentionally co-opt and abuse mental health language. What I mean by that is when you hear people making jokes like, oh my God, I'm so OCD about that. Or I was completely traumatized by that meeting. Or this project is so hard, I feel like I'm going to kill myself. People say that stuff and you don't know who's around. You don't know what they've gone through. You don't hear people saying, oh my God, I ran down the hall so fast, I feel like I have COPD. Oh my God, my body hurts so much from that workout, I feel like I have fibromyalgia. You don't hear people saying that, but mental health language is much easier to co-opt and abuse.
Well, I think there's probably a lot of reasons behind that.
A ton.
It's co-opted.
A ton.
There's a lot of reasons behind that. Part of it is that mental health language has a means of, I think people are fascinated by psychology and mental health, right? And and we are like, although most people don't want to go to or would be ashamed to admit that they might go to a therapist, many people might be, maybe less so these days than before, or outside of like certain social sets in Manhattan for a while. But I think that the media knows that we cannot but be interested in things that are off the beaten path. So if somebody has an odd behavior, they're going, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So
I literally wrote that in the book.
Okay. If it bleeds, it leads. So the media, there you go. Okay, I'll quote you. What you said. No, if it bleeds, it leads. It does.
I can't take credit for the statement. It's been there forever.
It's been there forever. But like, so there's that aspect of it. There's also the fact that people are just interested in human nature. I mean, we're narcissistic creatures. We love to stare back at each other and see how, and we're social creatures, right? So there's that element of it, but it's also seeped more readily into the popular nomenclature, which isn't the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
When I have patients self-diagnosing, I say, no. First of all, diagnosis is this very specific thing that you technically can't do unless you have a degree or a license actually, which requires the degree and a lot of, hundreds of thousands, if not thousands of hours of training.
Yep.
And I think there's a tendency to use, like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody calling someone a narcissist in the last 5 years. That's a bugaboo now. That's like, oh, that person's the boogeyman. That person's terrible. Or that person, I have OCD, or that person's so ADHD, it ticks me off, or maybe I have ADHD, or, And so, like, it just kind of seeped into popular culture, which means there's an over self-pathologizing just naturally, and it's just kind of floating in the mental and linguistic soup of cultures, at least Western cultures, right? At least from my living in an American culture, and when I go to India, where my wife's family is at, not so much, not to the same extent. They have their different culture.
There is a huge media and film and TV influence, massive section in the outside of work Roadblocks section. Okay. And on top of that, it's also a way for some people to either make fun of or absolve themselves of responsibility by slapping on a pop psychologist diagnosis, so people will excuse them for their behavior.
Yeah. And so there is a problem with that. And
of course there is. It devalues the experiences of people who actually have that diagnosis and live with and manage it. You wouldn't say to someone that because you have occasional stomach trouble that you have Crohn's disease. That's what I'm equating it to.
Yeah. That's
what I'm equating it to.
Yeah. And I would say sometimes when people have debilitating, serious mental health problems, that'd be like saying, well, I have a limp today, maybe I need to have my leg amputated, because I pulled something wrong. Like you wouldn't say that. Or maybe I'm an amputee. Look at me. Right?
Yeah, it's that ridiculous. Yeah. And so the way that I tend to talk about it, not only in the book, but also when I go into companies, I get very, very simple and go back to the biology. This brain is an organ like any other organ in the body. This organ can have a health state, a stressed state, and an illness state. Why is it being treated any differently just because it's the organ that governs who we are and how we interact with the environment and ourselves? And they go, oh my God, I didn't think about it like that. And I go, there we go.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. It's an organ. Stop co-opting language about that organ because you wouldn't do it about another one.
Yeah. But very true. And so this is like one of the biggest roadblocks. What is the biggest roadblock to this change at work right now? What do you think is the biggest roadblock?
Fear of disapproval.
Okay. Disapproval because one has a problem?
Yeah. Fear of, maybe the better phrase would be fear of being ostracized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
People are naturally social creatures. They don't want to be othered. And there is still very much the stigma that, we are working on, that just because someone has a mental health condition doesn't mean it determines all of their life. It doesn't mean it determines their capabilities. It doesn't mean those things because it comes in shades of gray. There are some folks who have very mild mental health conditions, as you know. There's some folks who it's completely debilitating and they can't function in life. And most folks are somewhere in between, a lot of which are very high functioning. And so because of the narrative attached to a mental illness, people are really good at quickly filling in the holes of what they don't know. And because a lot of people are still learning about what this really is, people are nervous to disclose to those at work about something they might be struggling with, just so they can know, how to best communicate with them or how they could have support, or just because they wanted them to know if they seemed different on a day. Right. But if that person doesn't have a true understanding of mental health and mental illness, they'll get very creative in determining what that means about that person.
Exactly. Yeah. So do you advocate, or do you, I know you do a lot of consulting and presentations and whatnot. Do you advocate, or do you actually like kind of go through a bit of a list of things you might see and help people understand what a person might be going through, that, like,
it's all in the book. It's all in the book in great granular detail. Mm-hmm. And I even say, if you're going to share with purpose. Who are you sharing with? Why are you sharing it with? What do you want them to do with the information? Here's what is helpful to share. Here's what's not helpful to share. Here's what to do if the conversation goes south. Just very, very, very clear. For sharing about your own mental health, supporting a peer, or supporting a team member, or getting support as a leader.
Yeah. Okay.
It gives all the contextual information.
So the book is for people who might have a problem and they're trying to express it or approach an HR department or
anyone.
Mm-hmm.
The book is aimed at individuals, no matter where you sit in the organization, whether you are a team member, a leader, you work in HR, you're a founder. The book is, here's what you can do as an individual to change the narrative around mental health and mental illness at work, and how to have these conversations really well.
Okay. Excellent. Let me go back to my question. Do you advocate for companies to actually have like someone such as yourself come in and talk about mental health in the workplace, or have the HR people, have like an in-service, part of an in-service day would be, hey, this is how we approach mental health. Don't think that because you say you have PTSD, we will believe you have PTSD. If you do have a problem, we need to have like a letter from a therapist or a psychiatrist or something like that, or a doctor. Like what? Because you did mention that as kind of like people trying to piggyback on this movement and exploit it, right? Like how do you address that? And how do you address, like, because the narrative's out there, just like it's out there in the interwebs and in the media and the social media, and a lot of misinformation's out there. How do you get the proper information out there? How do you make it standard operational procedures to say, hey, this is just part of life, and if you have a problem, come to us, let us know, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And how do you do all that, and how do you stop people from abusing the system?
Well, I go directly into companies, and they usually hire me for a variety of reasons. So some of them will hire me for advising on how to create mental health at work initiatives and programs within their business. Mm-hmm. And I most importantly help them define, what is the actual why? Why are you really doing this? Because if you're not clear with the whole organization about the truth, they'll just see it as a checkbox exercise. So I work with them a lot on describing why they're doing it, not just that they're doing it. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, the advising and helping with, writing the story and things like that, I then do the organizational interventions of it's psychoeducation around what is mental health, what is mental illness, how should we actually talk about this, how should you talk about it to each other, here's how you can acquire the skill set so you can actually talk to each other in a constructive way, here's when you should go to HR, here's when you shouldn't go to HR because you could do it on your own. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And being very, very clear and not compromising on how I view mental health at work conversations being constructive, not the trendy conversation. I don't work with organizations that don't explain an authentic reason about why they're actually doing this. Mm-hmm. I am very, very clear in my advising and scoping with any organization. You got to be doing this for the right reason, not the trendy, sexy reason. Because if I feel that in any way, I don't proceed. And through my social media posts and through the book, through these podcasts, through everything, I am unabashedly clear about how I think the mental health at work movement and how I contribute to it is doing really good work, and where I'm also calling out that it needs to improve. I stand by those decisions. And all I can do through my keynotes, my workshops, my seminars, my interviews, the panels, is being very clear about how I, Melissa, want to make my impact in all of it, because that's all I can control.
Right. Exactly. So you're setting the tone for your conversation, and you choose the people you're going to talk with, basically.
And they also choose me. The organizations that ask me to come in and advise, or ask me to come in and speak or train their leaders or do a talk for the entire company, they're the organizations that want to have the real conversations, okay, not the hashtagable conversations.
Right. Mike, everybody talks about many people talk about how they're overworked, they're burnt out, and especially that's happened more and more so since people have been working from home in their pajamas, working more hours, right? But companies think about the bottom line first, often, with a capitalist mindset, right? Maybe not with the socially responsible companies, though there are those out there. How does that company account for how its work environment is contributing to anxiety and depression and mental health issues? And do they take up their cross, so to speak, their burden, like the things that they've done, the things that they like? Do they examine their work hours? Do they examine do they reshift things? How can, because that must be a difficult. That must be kind of like the difficult thing that's in the room that you sometimes have to talk about with a company.
Yeah. So there are some companies who lean in really hard, and they do anonymous employee engagement surveys with a very clear message of, we want to make it better. Please be honest with us around what your experience is, and how you have experience working here and what we can do to shift it. There are some organizations that lean in really hard, and they'll look at training up their points of influence, different leaders, people like that, in terms of then enabling those folks to have the skill set to do things differently. Because engagement surveys and changing a value statement and saying this is going to be a strategic priority is not enough. You have to equip the human beings in your business to then do that, which means helping them understand what it is, why it's important, and how to do it. And on top of that, something very important to remember is that it's not just organizations and leaders who make the impact. There are a lot of folks not in leadership positions who have a negative impact on mental health at work discussions. Any person in any organization can, the bad apples per se. But what I think is really important to remember is that the leaders in the organizations can take, as much responsibility until they're blue in the face. But if it's not realized as a collective effort to make the shift, then individuals who are not leaders and owners, they absolve themselves of their responsibility, saying, well, it has to be the company, it's their job. No, it's everyone's job. The company and the leaders have a responsibility for being in a position of influence. Power dynamics are very real, but everybody in the workplace is a chronologically aged adult. So they also have to contribute to shifting the narrative, because it takes a chorus of voices, not just a little group of people. And there are folks who are dedicated to not only not buying in, but there's also people who exist who don't see the purpose of managing their own mental health. They want others to do it for them. Those people exist. We can be honest about that. You've probably treated a few of them. And so it's about
just a few.
Understanding that there's not only the organizational, duty of care, but there's also the personal responsibility and individual accountability piece.
Okay. Well, we're talking about, since we're kind of on the subject of a systemic approach to things, right, within the workplace.
How Adlerian of us.
Yeah, that's true. I'll take that. I'll take that reference. I'll take that reference for $300, Melissa. Just kidding. All right. So it is very systemic, but I want to piggyback on what we talked about last time you were on, because you've worked extensively with European companies, right? You were in the UK.
Oh, a ton.
Yeah. difference between how they take mental health there versus here? And do they have the ground floor, die Grundlage? Do they have the ground floor? Do they have the ground floor for having like more of a humanistic approach to work versus the U.S.? Like the U.S. is kind of like mechanistic.
They started it before us.
Okay.
They started it before us.
And do you think that when you present, that you talk to the suits, if you will, and say, hey, I've worked with, here's a model over here, and you point to Siemens, or you point to a company like in the UK, right? Or a Canadian company, and here's a model, and this is how they do it. And maybe what you need to do is look at their general attitude towards, PTO and maternity leave and things like that, because those things would go a long way.
I know. It's so interesting because when I lived in the UK for 3 years, and it was so interesting because the UK, when it used to be a part of Europe, because it's not anymore, that happened while we were living there, by the way.
What was it? It used to be a part of the US? What?
Brexit.
Oh, Brexit. Oh, it used to be part of the EU. Okay. Oh, yeah. I think you said, did I hear you say
part of the EU?
Did you say EU or US?
I don't even remember. Well, I might have just had a mix.
Yeah, I was going to say, really? I thought that was the other way around. That's what.
Final answer: UK is not a part of the EU anymore. Yes. We were there living in England when that happened.
And when that,
and so basically, what was so interesting is that it was an inverse relationship: UK versus US, for example. So in the US, depending on where you live, people will talk about therapy or medication like they're talking about the weather, if it's like LA or New York or whatever. But at work, no way, because Americans can be very litigious and the US is a very liability-focused country. In the UK, total opposite. They led the charge about talking about mental health at work, but we're kind of slow in picking up the slack socially. My theory around this, around why in parts of Europe and also in the UK, that those are very collectivistic countries. And they tend to prioritize, community and the group and watching out for each other much more than a lot of Americans, because many Americans, obviously not all, there's 335 million of us, are very individualistic and very self-focused. And so I think that's why the UK led the charge, is that they're very good at focusing on community and caring for each other.
They have more of a collectivist kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And do you think that's
there's more compassion. Truly, there's more compassion.
Right. Yeah, you're not just a worker who's a chip in the or cog in the wheel to make the bottom line happen.
I also think it depends on the industry and company. Obviously, we can't generalize all of Europe, but there in general is just more compassion for people who are having very reasonable reactions to transient life events or to a mental illness. I mean, they're just more compassionate to each other. I saw it when I lived there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. But it's a different mindset. I think that somewhere along the lines, the march of progress has kind of subsumed our humanity in some ways here. But you're leading the charge to humanize work, and that's excellent.
Trying to. Thank you.
And the book, which I can see over your shoulder, is yes, you can talk about mental health in the workplace. Here's
mental
why
health
at work, and here's why and how to do it really well.
That's right. Available across all major retailers on the interwebs. On the interwebs.
Is it also? I see you have a paperback. Do you have a hard copy, like a hardback for people?
There is no hard copy yet. There is an audiobook.
Awesome. Did you narrate it?
It does exist. No, they wouldn't let me because I wasn't a professional voiceover artist. But I did get to choose who did it.
Oh, okay.
And she's great. I thought I heard the sample. She did a really great job.
Awesome.
It exists, and we're waiting for Audible to upload it. Any day now.
Well, best of luck with that and everything else. and you're leading the charge for humanizing the workplace.
Thank you.
Trying
to do my part.
Okay. On that note, we'll talk to you soon. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great holiday.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know that the Psychology Talk podcast has a Facebook page and an Instagram page? It's true. You can find more information about other guests and episodes, as well as more information about psychology and mental health. And if you liked this episode, go ahead and like us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, or Spotify and leave a review. It helps us grow our audience and provide more quality shows. All material, copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. This podcast is for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.